My parents stole my college fund from my brother's startup, so I rose on my own and taught them a lesson when they came back begging pathetically. When I got the acceptance letter from my dream college, it was one of the happiest days of my life. I'd worked so hard to get to this point, pulling all-nighters, spending my weekends in the library, skipping out on parties to ace every exam. This was the payoff, the validation of years of effort. The engineering program was one of the best in the country, and I was so ready to start this new chapter. I imagined myself walking across campus, moving into the dorms, meeting new people, and diving headfirst into challenging coursework. The first person I told was my mom. She gave me a big smile, hugged me, and said she was proud. My dad nodded and said, "That's my boy," in that way he always did when I accomplished something. He liked to take credit for everything. Everything seemed fine at first, but when I brought up the tuition, their reactions weren't what I expected. I still remember sitting at the kitchen table with them. I had my acceptance packet laid out, showing them all the details about costs and scholarships. I was excited, maybe a little nervous, but I thought we were just going to figure out the logistics together. That's when my dad let out this big sigh. "We just don't have the money for college right now, son," he said. For a second, I didn't understand. "What do you mean?" I asked. I thought there was a fund for this. My dad started rambling about how the economy had been tough lately. My mom chimed in, mentioning my brother's medical bills. It was like they had rehearsed the excuse because they passed the explanation back and forth like it was a relay race. The more they talked, the more obvious it became that this wasn't news they had just discovered. "But you've always said you've been saving since I was a kid," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You always told me not to worry because you were setting money aside for college." My mom couldn't meet my eyes. She stared at her hands like they were suddenly the most interesting thing in the room. "We had to use that money for emergencies," she said softly. "Sweetie, I'm so sorry." It was like someone had punched me in the chest. I sat there, stunned, trying to process what they were saying. Sure, I knew my brother's health had been bad for a while. He'd been diagnosed with a chronic condition a few years back, and the treatment couldn't have been cheap. But I still didn't understand how everything could just be gone. "Maybe you could take out some loans," my dad suggested, "or start at community college and transfer later. Lots of people do that." I nodded, but it was automatic. My head was spinning. I had worked so hard, had done everything right, and now I was supposed to settle for something less. I didn't even know what to say to them. I just mumbled, "Yeah, I'll figure something out," and left the room. For the next few weeks, I threw myself into researching financial aid and loan options. I started looking into cheaper schools, even though it felt like giving up on my dreams. But the more I thought about it, the more something didn't sit right with me. My parents had always been so supportive of my education before. They were the ones who pushed me to aim for top colleges, to join clubs, and take AP classes. Now they seemed almost indifferent, like my future wasn't their problem anymore. The change in their attitude was too sharp to ignore. They didn't ask about my plans, didn't offer to help me figure out alternatives. Every time I brought up college, they either changed the subject or gave me some vague platitude about how everything would work out. It felt like I had gone from being the kid they were proud of to someone they didn't want to deal with anymore. One night, I overheard them talking in the living room. My dad was saying something about my brother's big opportunity and how they needed to support him now because it was his time to shine. My mom agreed, saying she believed it was a worthy investment. At first, I thought they were talking about his medical treatment, but the way they phrased it felt off. I tried to push the doubts out of my mind, telling myself I was just being paranoid, but the seed was planted, and it kept growing. I started noticing little things, like how they perked up every time my brother called to talk about his business plans. Meanwhile, my college prospects were treated like an afterthought. Then, one Saturday afternoon, I was in my dad's office looking for a copy of my birth certificate. I needed it for one of the financial aid forms, and my mom said it was probably in the filing cabinet. As I flipped through the folders, I stumbled across one labeled with my brother's name. I know I shouldn't have opened it. I wasn't trying to snoop, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside, I found a stack of papers that made my stomach drop. It wasn't medical bills like I expected. It was an investment contract. My parents had poured a massive amount of money into my brother's tech startup. And the kicker? The date on the contract was 2 weeks before they told me my college fund was gone. My hands were shaking as I read through the details. They had invested everything they had saved for me, money they'd promised would secure my future, into my brother's business. The betrayal hit me like a freight train. All those years of hearing them talk about how important education was, all those late nights I spent studying because they told me it would pay off, and this was the thanks I got. I put the file back where I found it and left the office, feeling like the ground had been ripped out from under me. For the rest of the day, I couldn't even look at them. Every time I tried, all I could see was that folder and the lies they had told me. After finding that investment contract, I couldn't look at my parents the same way. Everything about them felt fake, their smiles, their reassurances, even their so-called apologies about the college fund. I kept replaying that night over and over in my head, how they sat there telling me they couldn't afford to send me to school while knowing they'd already handed my future over to my brother. At first, I thought maybe there was more to the story, maybe they had a good reason, something I didn't understand yet. I tried to give them the benefit of the doubt, but deep down, I knew better. I started paying closer attention to their behavior. My dad seemed a little too interested in every update about my brother's company. My mom got this proud, almost giddy look on her face every time she talked about how innovative his idea was. Meanwhile, whenever I brought up school, they barely gave me the time of day. It felt like I'd been demoted from son to, what, a backup plan. A responsibility they didn't want to deal with anymore? I felt like I didn't belong in my own family. For days, I debated whether to confront them. Part of me wanted to scream at them, demand to know how they could do this to me, but another part of me wasn't ready. I needed to know the full story before I said anything. So, I started digging. I spent hours trying to piece things together. I went through bank statements I found in the same filing cabinet, looking for anything that confirmed what I already suspected. I didn't want to believe it, but there it was, clear as day. The numbers matched up. Every penny they had set aside for my college fund was gone, transferred into some account tied to my brother's startup. I wasn't angry at my brother, at least not at first. I figured he probably didn't even know where the money came from. But the fact that my parents had made that choice, had prioritized his business over my education, made my blood boil. They had taken something that was supposed to be mine, something they had promised me for years, and given it to him without a second thought. Then there were the conversations I overheard late at night when they thought I was asleep. My parents would talk about how the risk was worth it and how they believed my brother's startup would pay off in the long run. My dad kept saying things like, "This is the best chance we have to set him up for life." Set him up for life. What about me? One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I was sitting in my room, staring at the acceptance letter from my dream college. It felt like a cruel joke now, a reminder of something I couldn't have. My stomach churned every time I thought about it. That's Ketika. I decided I couldn't keep quiet any longer. The next day, I was sitting at the kitchen table when my dad walked in. My mom was out running errands, and it was just the two of us. I figured it was as good a time as any. "Hey, Dad," I said, trying to sound casual, "can I ask you something?" He looked up from his coffee, raising an eyebrow. "What's on your mind?" I hesitated for a second, then said, "How much did you guys invest in Mike's business?" For a split second, he froze. It was subtle, but I caught it. He quickly recovered, setting his coffee down and giving me this confused look. "What are you talking about?" "You know exactly what I'm talking about," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "I saw the papers, Dad. The investment contract. The dates." His face hardened, and for the first time in my life, I saw him drop the dad act. He wasn't apologetic or ashamed. He was defensive. "That's none of your concern," he said flatly. "It's my concern when you used my college fund to do it," I shot back. "You told me there wasn't any money for school, but there was enough to gamble on Mike's startup." "It wasn't a gamble," he snapped. "It was an investment. We believe in your brother's potential. This could be life-changing for him." "And what about me?" I demanded. "What about my future? Or does that not matter to you anymore?" He didn't answer. He just sat there, glaring at me like I was being unreasonable. At that moment, I realized there wasn't going to be an apology. He didn't feel bad about what he'd done. In his mind, he had made the right decision, and I was just supposed to accept it. When my mom got home later that day, I confronted her too. She cried, of course. She always cried when she didn't want to take responsibility for something. She kept saying things like, "We thought it was the best choice for the family, and we didn't mean to hurt you." But all I could think was, "You didn't think about me at all." Over the next few days, the tension in the house was unbearable. My dad avoided me, my mom acted like a martyr, and my brother, well, my brother was oblivious to the whole thing. Eventually, I realized there was no point in staying. I couldn't trust them anymore. They didn't see me as a priority, and I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. So, I started making plans to leave. It wasn't an easy decision. I didn't have much money saved up, and I knew things would be tough. But I also knew I couldn't stay in a place where I was always going to be second best. The tension in the house grew thicker by the day after I confronted my parents. My dad acted like I didn't exist, and my mom tried to tiptoe around me, but neither of them showed any sign of regret. It felt like they were waiting for me to calm down and get over it, as if their betrayal was just a misunderstanding I'd eventually forget. Meanwhile, my brother Mike came home for Sunday dinner like everything was fine. He walked into the house with that confident, easygoing smile he always had, oblivious to the storm brewing under the surface. My parents greeted him like he was a celebrity, asking about his business and showering him with praise. I sat at the dinner table, silently fuming, watching the whole scene play out like I wasn't even there. Dinner started as it always did. My mom asked Mike about his latest progress, and he launched into a story about how his company was gaining traction. He talked about potential investors, new ideas he was working on, and how proud he was of everything he'd accomplished. My parents hung on his every word, their faces lighting up like he just cured cancer. I couldn't take it anymore. So, I said, cutting through the conversation, how much did Mom and Dad invest in your startup? The room went dead silent. Mike froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. My dad's face turned beet red, and my mom's smile vanished in an instant. What? Mike asked, clearly confused. He looked between me and our parents, trying to figure out what was going on. You heard me, I said, my voice steady but sharp. How much of my college fund did they pour into your business? Enough, my dad snapped, slamming his hand on the table. This isn't the time or place to bring this up. It's exactly the time and place, I shot back. You think I'm just going to sit here and play along like everything's fine? You lied to me. You told me there was no money for school, and then you gave it all to him. Mike looked stunned. Wait, what? I didn't know that money was for your college, he said, turning to our parents. Is that true? My mom started to stammer, but my dad cut her off. What we do with our money is none of his business, he said coldly. None of my business? I repeated, my voice rising. It became my business when you let me believe I'd have the chance to go to college. You made me think my future mattered to you, but I guess I was wrong. Sweetie, it's not like that, my mom said, her voice shaky. She reached across the table like she was trying to calm me down. We had to make a choice. Your brother's business is an investment in the future. You thought what? I interrupted, my anger boiling over. That my education wasn't worth it? That his pipe dream was more important than everything I've been working toward? Do you even realize what you've done? Mike held up his hands defensively. Look, I didn't know about this. If I had known it was your college money, I wouldn't have taken it. Save it, I snapped, turning to him. You're not the problem here. They are. And honestly, I'm not surprised. You've always been their favorite. At least now they're done pretending otherwise. My dad stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. That's enough, he barked. You're acting like a spoiled child. Do you have any idea how hard we've worked to support this family? We did what we thought was best for everyone. Best for everyone? I laughed bitterly. You mean best for Mike? You didn't even think about me. You made a decision that ruined my future, and now you're mad because I won't just sit here and take it. You don't understand the bigger picture, my dad said, his tone patronizing. This business has the potential to change all of our lives. You're being short-sighted. I'm being short-sighted? I yelled. You're the ones who threw away my college fund on a gamble. You didn't just lie to me, you made it crystal clear where I stand in this family. Well, guess what? I'm done. I'm done being the afterthought. I pushed back my chair and stood up. My mom was crying, my dad was glaring at me, and Mike looked like he wanted to disappear. You can keep your money, I said, grabbing my bag. I don't need it. I'll figure out my own future, and it'll be without you. I walked out of the house, ignoring their calls for me to come back. My mom was sobbing, begging me to stay, but I couldn't. I couldn't sit there for another second and pretend we were still a family. That night, I packed up my things. I didn't have much, just a duffel bag of clothes, my laptop, and a few $100 I'd saved from my part-time job. I didn't have a plan, but I didn't care. All I knew was that I couldn't stay in that house anymore. I slept in my car that night, parked in a grocery store lot. It wasn't comfortable, but it felt better than being under their roof. For the first time, I felt free, not in a happy way, but in a way that meant I didn't have to rely on anyone who didn't value me. The first few weeks after I left home were a blur. I lived out of my car, parked in random lots, and spent my days trying to figure out what to do next. I didn't have much money, just a few $100 I'd saved up from part-time jobs during high school. That money disappeared fast when you factor in food, gas, and the occasional cheap motel when sleeping in the car became unbearable. I ignored every call and text from my parents. My mom sent long, emotional messages about how she loved me and didn't want our family to fall apart. My dad, on the other hand, was all about tough love. You need to grow up, he texted once. The real world isn't going to coddle you. It was infuriating. He acted like I was the one who had done something wrong, like leaving was a temper tantrum and not a response to years of being overlooked and treated like I didn't matter. I didn't even know how to respond, so I didn't. I just let their messages pile up and focused on surviving. I eventually landed in a small town a few states away. I hadn't planned to end up there, but I ran out of gas and money at the same time, so it felt like fate. The town wasn't anything special, just a handful of stores, a diner, and a few small businesses, but it was quiet, and nobody knew me. I walked into the diner, desperate for a job. The manager, a tired-looking guy in his 50s, took one look at me and said, "You start tomorrow." I didn't even ask what the pay was. I just nodded, thanked him, and spent the last of my cash on a tank of gas and a pack of ramen to eat in my car. The work wasn't glamorous, just waiting tables and cleaning up after shifts, but it was enough to get by. I lived off tips, saving every penny I could. A week later, I picked up a second job at a local garage, helping with oil changes and basic repairs. It wasn't exactly my dream life, but it was mine. For the first time, I wasn't relying on anyone else. The days blurred together. I worked from early morning at the garage till late at night at the diner. My body ached, and I barely had time to think, but in some strange way, I felt free. I didn't have my parents hovering over me, didn't have to hear about how great my brother was doing. It was just me, figuring things out one day at a time. One night, after a particularly long shift, I sat in my car, eating cold ramen and scrolling through my phone. I saw another text from my mom, this one longer than usual. She talked about how much she missed me, how things hadn't been the same since I left. "Your father and I just want to talk," she wrote. "We can work this out as a family." I rolled my eyes. Now she wanted to work things out? Where was this energy when I was still living at home, begging them to care about my future? I tossed my phone onto the passenger seat and tried to ignore the knot of emotions in my chest. But as much as I wanted to shut them out completely, part of me still cared. I hated that about myself. After everything they'd done, some small, stupid part of me still wanted their approval. It was like I couldn't let go of the idea that maybe, just maybe, they'd finally see me as more than the backup son. Months went by, and I settled into a routine. Things started to stabilize. I managed to save up enough to rent a tiny room above a hardware store. It wasn't much, a bed, a desk, and a shared bathroom, but it felt like a palace compared to sleeping in my car. I started looking into local colleges, figuring out how I could take a few classes while working. It wasn't the prestigious program I dreamed of, but it was a start. One day, while I was wiping down tables at the diner, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen and saw my brother's name. For a second, I considered ignoring it, like I had every other call from him, but curiosity got the better of me. "Hello," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Hey," he said, sounding awkward. Just wanted to check in. Mom told me you left." "Yeah, no thanks to you," I said flatly. There was a long pause. "Look, I didn't know about the money," he said finally. "If I'd known, I wouldn't have taken it. I swear. Doesn't really change anything, does it?" I said. "You still got it, and I got nothing." "I know," he said quietly. I didn't want you to think I was part of it. I'm sorry, man. For real." I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to believe him, but another part of me couldn't shake the resentment. He was still their golden child, the one they'd chosen to invest in while leaving me behind. His apology didn't change that. "Thanks for the call," I said finally, "but I've got to get back to work." He sighed but didn't push. "Okay. Take care of yourself," he said. I hung up, feeling more conflicted than ever. On one hand, it was nice to hear him acknowledge the situation. On the other hand, it didn't fix anything. I was still scraping by while he chased his dreams, backed by the parents who were supposed to support both of us. That night, I sat in my tiny room, staring at the stack of community college brochures I'd picked up. I thought about all the dreams I'd had for my future, how much I'd sacrificed to get into that engineering program. It still hurt to know I'd never have that. But as I looked around the room, I realized something else: I was making it on my own. It wasn't perfect, and it definitely wasn't easy, but it was mine. Months passed, and life started to feel a little more manageable. I was working 2 jobs, scraping by in my tiny rented room, and slowly piecing together what my future might look like. It wasn't glamorous by any stretch, but I was proud of myself for making it this far. I'd gone from having everything ripped away to standing on my own, no matter how rough the road was. Then, one day, out of nowhere, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway. "Hello? It's me," said a voice I hadn't heard in months. My mom. I almost hung up. I didn't have the energy for her guilt trips or excuses, but something in her voice stopped me. She sounded different. What do you want? I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. I left your father, she said, just like that. No build-up, no preamble. I sat there, stunned. What? I left him, she repeated. I can't do it anymore. I can't keep pretending everything's okay when it's not. I should have done it years ago. My mind was racing. This wasn't the woman I'd grown up with, the one who always backed my dad no matter how wrong he was. Why now? I asked cautiously. Because of you, she said. Because I can't keep living with what we did to you. Watching you leave, knowing how much we hurt you, it made me realize how wrong things have been for a long time. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to scream at her, tell her it was too late to make things right. But another part, the part that still cared, wanted to believe her. Look, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, she continued, but I want to try to make things right. I sold the house. Half of it is yours. It should have been your college fund in the first place. I hope it's enough for you to start over. I was speechless. For months, I'd been grinding just to get by, and now she was offering me a lifeline. But at what cost? What about Dad? I asked finally. She sighed. He's angry, of course. He still thinks he did the right thing. He's convinced Mike's business is the key to everything. And Mike, he's upset too, but he gets it. He knows we messed up, even if your father doesn't. I leaned back in my chair, trying to process everything. My mom was finally taking a stand, finally admitting what they'd done was wrong. But I couldn't just let go of all the pain, all the resentment, that easily. I don't know what to say, I admitted. You don't have to say anything right now, she said. Just think about it, and know that I'm truly sorry for everything. I should have stood up for you sooner. I failed you as a mother, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. After we hung up, I sat in silence for what felt like hours. I didn't know what to feel, relief, anger, gratitude. It was all jumbled together in my chest, making it hard to breathe. Over the next few weeks, I watched as my mom followed through on her promises. She sold the house and sent me half of the proceeds. It wasn't enough to cover all 4 years of college, but it was a good start. I enrolled in a local college's engineering program. Nothing fancy, but it had everything I needed. Moving forward felt strange, almost surreal. For so long, I'd been in survival mode, just trying to get through each day. Now I had something to work toward again, a reason to keep pushing. My mom moved to the same town, renting a small apartment nearby. She got a job as a bookkeeper and started over too. We didn't talk every day, but when we did, it felt different, more honest. She wasn't the same person she'd been when I was growing up, and I wasn't sure if that was a good thing or if it just made me sad for the time we'd lost. As for my brother, he called me a few more times. Each time, he apologized for what happened and tried to make amends. He even offered to repay the money my parents had invested in his startup, but I turned him down. I don't want it, I told him. It's not about the money anymore. It's about what it meant, what they chose. He didn't argue, but I could tell he felt guilty. He should have. Honestly, even if he hadn't known where the money came from, he'd always been the golden child, and he'd never stopped to question why. My dad, on the other hand, stayed silent. He didn't call, didn't text, didn't even try to reach out. I heard from my mom that he was furious about the house being sold and blamed me for ruining the family. I couldn't bring myself to care. He'd made his choice, and I'd made mine. College was hard, especially while working part-time to cover the costs my mom's contribution couldn't. But it felt good to be back on track, to be working toward a future I could be proud of. Some nights, I'd sit in my dorm room, surrounded by textbooks and papers, and think about how much had changed in just a year. The pain of my parents' betrayal was still there, but it didn't define me anymore. I'd learned to rely on myself, to fight for what I wanted, even when the odds were stacked against me. And I'd learned that family isn't about blood or loyalty, it's about trust and respect. My relationship with my mom is still a work in progress. We're trying, but there's a lot of history to untangle. As for my brother, I'm not sure where we stand. He's made efforts to rebuild our relationship, but I'm not ready to let go of everything yet. My dad? I don't think I'll ever forgive him. He chose his pride and his vision of success over his own son, and that's not something I can forget. But despite everything, I'm proud of how far I've come. I've learned that my worth isn't tied to anyone else's opinion or investment. It's something I've built on my own, and that, to me, is the best kind of victory.